Hi, everybody. Welcome to our second, technically third YouTube live stream. I just had to take that overlay out because I realized that I put the icebreaker question to put the answer in the comments. What I really meant was to put it in the chat. So I always like to start these with a little brain teaser riddle question to get our juices flowing. So I'll go ahead and ask you face to face in the chat. Would you rather fight a horse-sized duck or 100 duck-sized horses? So we have Jimmy, first one in. Thank you. Answering with duck. I assume that means horse-sized duck. Anybody else want to jump in? Would you rather fight a horse-sized duck or 100? Quincy jumped in with horse duck. So far, horse duck wins. We'll give it another couple minutes for people to join us, and also to see if we have any more interesting answers to our little icebreaker question. Or if there's an option 3, you can jump in with something outside the box. We are creative people, after all. So I'll ask one more time our icebreaker question to put in the chat, not the comments, as I accidentally put on our little overlay. Would you rather fight a horse-sized duck or 100 duck-sized horses? We'll give it another couple minutes. Not a couple minutes. We'll give it more like 30 seconds. I think for me, I'd probably also go with horse-sized duck because I think fighting 100 of anything is a little unnerving. Okay, so horse-sized duck wins. With that, welcome to our YouTube live stream. I'm so excited you could be here. If we have not had the pleasure of meeting yet, my name is Jonathan Roberts. I'm the director here at the South Shore Piano School. If you're finding us through the magic of YouTube, South Shore Piano School is an actual music school where students come and take lessons. We have 10 teachers, 10 amazing teachers with us. We're in Quincy, Massachusetts, just south of Boston. And our mission as a school, as content creators, is to really take the complicated, often made complicated process of learning music and learning piano, just make it much simpler and accessible, and really try to touch as many lives as we can by giving them a lifelong enjoyment of music making, both in the lessons that we give every day and through content like this, reaching into the cyber universe. So a little bit about my background and about the topic for today. Today we're going to talk about scales and harmony. So a little bit about my background, and I would invite you to go ahead and write in the comments, or sorry, write in the chat if you can relate to any of this. But I learned very traditionally, as so many piano students do. So I was classically trained. I didn't do a whole lot of improvisation and didn't do a lot of chord reading. And when scales were introduced to me, I was just thinking about this last week. It was just basically sort of like a book that was handed to me. I think it was actually called the Scale Book. And it was like, okay, here, practice these, a new one every 2 or 3 weeks. And I didn't really know what they were for. So naturally, I sort of ended up getting bored with them, ended up not practicing them, and then my teacher stopped asking for them. When I went to my next teacher after that, similar sort of cycle. We started doing some scales. Again, I didn't really understand the purpose and how it applied to the music I was playing. So I stopped practicing them, teacher stopped asking for them, and then onwards we went. And it kind of continued that way all the way through college. So when I was in undergraduate theory, I finally sort of started to understand this concept of how scales and harmony were related, but it was mostly to analyze music that somebody else had already written. Like if you just asked me to play like the 4 chord of C major, I wouldn't be able to do that very quickly. So it was more from an analytical perspective. And that was just for 2 years of required theory. And then it was back to focusing just totally on repertoire, learning new music, giving recitals, things like that. Now, starting with my master's degree, I started to branch out a little bit more. I took some jazz piano lessons with a jazz teacher, started to do some improvisation. This is where it started to make a little bit more sense how this applies. But the irony was it wasn't with any of my classical music. It was with jazz and pop music. And at that point, I had a church gig and I had to learn chord reading for that, stuff like that. And then went through my doctorate, didn't do any improvisation at that point. And it was really after teaching for a while, because the sad irony here is once I started teaching, I started doing the same exact thing. I turned around and when I had students, I would just give them a scale, C major. All right, next week, let's do G major. Next week, let's do D major. Because I figured at that point, that's just what good piano teachers did. And same thing, they didn't want to practice it anymore. I stopped asking for it. But over the last several weeks, I've been just thinking more about this big picture of music and what is it about why we don't like to practice scales that much and why the disconnect between scales and actual music. So I thought that this would be a fun topic for this live stream because as I've done more improvisation with my students, it's really started to make more sense, not only for me, but also showing them how scales relate to music making relates to the music that they're playing. So the purpose of this live stream is to just go from the very beginning. You might be a student with us watching this. You might be a student from elsewhere watching this. You might be somebody who had a not so great experience with scales yourself. You might be a total beginner, just curious about this. You might be a piano teacher looking to add some more tools to your tool belt. All are welcome here. If you're super experienced, it might seem like basic stuff, but remember, for students, this is just a whole other world of music that we're trying to introduce to them. So I have my iPad and I have my little list of things here. I was thinking about sort of the most logical order to present this stuff in because it can very easily be complicated or not make sense. And then I threw up my whole order and changed it about 45 minutes before this. So if I have to jump around a little bit, just bear with me. I do want to make this as interactive as we can, though. So as we continue with the live stream, I'd invite you, if you have any questions, to drop them in the chats so that we'll pause every so often to see what kind of questions that we have, and then we'll talk through them because we want to make this interactive and a learning experience for everybody. I'm excited to share that I'm test driving a new cool little multi-camera setup. So hopefully you see my keyboard there, and then we have a close-up of the keyboard, and then we have my keyboard and iPad. So hopefully you're seeing what I'm seeing. It seems to be working properly. And then I'd also like to invite you to stick until the end because we're going to also experiment with having a little game show at the end. If you're familiar with Kahoot, we'll try a YouTube live stream Kahoot match. You can play along at home. You just need a separate device or a separate window, but we'll use questions from this live stream in there. And I think it could be really cool. It could also not quite work properly. Stick around and we'll find out together. Okay, so with that, let's just jump straight in and talk about what scales are, why we should care, why they're important. I'm going to switch to this screen. And as I promised from the title of this live stream, this is total beginners, for total beginners. So we're just going to go from the very beginning. So here's the set of pitches. Now, I did say this would be sound first. We'd be approaching this through sound. Now, if we were literally doing that, we would just sing for the entire thing and just not look at anything. But I think this is important to have the visual here. And this is the reason why piano is like the best instrument, because you can actually see how all of the pitches relate to each other. Not so much the case if you're a violinist or clarinetist just doing music for the first time. So in music, or at least in Western music, we have 12 pitches. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And then it starts over in these different octaves. So 12 pitches, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, and then back to C. So 7 white keys, if you will. And then we have these black keys in between. So a sharp is when you take a note and it goes up a half step. So this is C, this is C sharp. Flats go the other direction. This is D, D flat. So we have C, D, E, F, G, A, B, and then we have these notes in between that we might refer to as a sharp or a flat name. But altogether, we have 12 pitches. Now, the challenge with writing any kind of music, or not the challenge, but the reality of writing music is that if there's not an order to these pitches, if there's not something sort of tying them together for it to make sense, then the music just kind of sounds random and chaotic. That's when you get music that sounds like, just sounds kind of weird to our ear. So a scale, the exciting thing about scales is that scales are the fabric that creates the music that we know and love. So what is a scale? A scale is a very specific sequence of notes that usually follows a specific pattern of whole steps and half steps. And about 98% of Western music is written in a major key or a minor key. So we're going to start with what makes a major scale and why we care about that. So a major scale is a specific sequence of half steps and whole steps. A half step, that's the smallest distance you can have between any two keys on the piano. And then a whole step is just two half steps. So like a whole step up from here, we'd count 1, 2. Whole step up from E would be 1, 2, F sharp. So a whole step is just two half steps. So to figure out a major scale from any key, it's pretty simple. You have your starting note. In this case, we'll try C. We go up a whole step, another whole step, a half step, a whole step, another whole step, another whole step, and then a half step. So the order goes starting note. Sometimes students will play the first note and say whole step. Not quite right, because remember, a whole step is the distance between two different notes. So we have our starting note, whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, whole step, half step. So that creates our major scale. We can follow that pattern starting on any note. Say I want to do a slightly harder key like A flat. A flat, same exact thing, whole step, another whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, whole step, half step. So why do we care about this? We care about this because this is literally the material from which we improvise music, that we compose music from, things like that. So just to give you an example, my favorite example that I like to use is Joy to the World, just because it starts with the entire scale like this. Actually, I'm gonna leave the chord out. So it's using C major scale. Say I want to go to a different universe. If I want to do D major, so I start on D, whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, whole step, half step. That's my D major scale. I could do Joy to the World in D major using those notes from the D major scale. The music you listen to all the time comes from scales. It's literally what music comes from. So how do we practice this? Because I think the biggest issue with how we teach scales, or how we've traditionally taught scales, is that we don't do it like this from a visual point of view. We usually start here. And before we even really touch the keyboard, if we haven't just sort of handed a book to the student, we'll say, all right, well, a scale is a sequence of notes, kind of like this. And here are the fingerings, and then come back with it learned next week. So I think by taking this approach, where first it's visual and then we actually create music with it, it can be so much more exciting for us and for our students. So let me bring us back here for a moment. So it's helpful to learn the proper fingerings for scales and things like that, because in addition to it being the fabric of music, it is also helpful for our technique and things like that. But I think the most effective way you can really appreciate how scales and music are interconnected are by actually making music with scales. And to do that, you can actually improvise. And you don't have to have studied a ton of theory or whatever to be able to improvise. Anybody can improvise. All we're doing here is improvising with a specific collection of notes. So let's say I'm learning the G major scale. We've already worked out our half steps and whole steps. We know that G major has F sharp in it. We can just make up melodies with it. I'm going to show you some ways you can make it more interesting in a moment, but there are no wrong notes as long as you stay on the scale. Another way you can think of it, you don't have to think all these half steps and whole steps. That's really just to give an appreciation of how these are constructed. But once you figure out these scales, say you know that G major has an F sharp in it, you can just think when you're improvising, just play all white keys, except instead of F, you'll play F sharp. Now I'm going to show you a couple of fun apps that you can use to try this out. And then we're going to talk about minor scales and then the system that kind of ties this all together, called the circle of fifths. But I wanted to save that until we go through some of these things so you can start having fun with scales right away. Because when you're improvising by yourself, it can feel kind of weird, especially when we don't have anybody to play with. So I want to show you two apps that you can check out. One is Funkbox. This is just sort of a drum beat app. There are all kinds of them that you can find, free and paid. And let's say for this example, I'm learning D major. I want to immerse myself in the universe of D major. So again, if I'm figuring it out from scratch, I can count my whole steps and half steps. Whole step, whole step, whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, whole step, half step. So that's F sharps and C sharps. I can just turn my backing track on and just have some fun. So now this is the first time I've tried this on a live stream. Hopefully it's coming through. So, you know. So immediately that kind of makes it more fun, and it also helps our rhythm because we're playing along with something. So that's one app that I would encourage you or your students to check out, to improvise with scales and just sort of have fun with them. And then another fun one, it's a little more complex to set up, but another is called iReal Pro. So fun fact, this software that could do what I'm going to show you when I was in undergrad, and this is before apps and all that good stuff, costs about $500. This app is, I think, like $15 to $20. So we've definitely progressed in that department. But this is often used by jazz students and jazz musicians to provide backing tracks so that they can practice, because jazz musicians who are improvising all the time, they can't necessarily bring a pianist or a guitarist or a band home with them to practice improvising. So they'll use backing track software kind of like this. So with this, but again, it takes a little bit of tweaking. So for this, I basically made a lead sheet and just put one measure of a G major chord. That's what the little triangle means. And then I set it up so that it'll repeat about 30 times. And for this, it's kind of cool because you can pick different styles as well. So I just did medium swing. Again, theoretically, I'm trying to familiarize myself and be creative with the G major scale. And I just hit play, counts me off. So that's iReal Pro. And again, if you want to have fun with that with scales, all you have to do, it takes a little getting used to, but you just type in a chord, set it to repeat many, many, many times, and you can have some fun with that. And one more feature of this I'll show you is you can change the style as well. So let's say I'm in sort of a Latin mood. I can just type that in, and it just changes the style of the accompaniment, probably the tempo too. I've been doing this for a little while. Don't feel like you have to get super crazy or your students have to get super crazy with it. But again, it's just an opportunity to actually make music. And I think that really makes that critical connection. So that's major scales and sort of an introduction to just making music with it. And the cool thing with improvising with these scales is as long as you play the notes of the scale, everything will sound good. If you play a note that's outside of the scale, it probably won't sound quite as good. So with that, let's continue now to minor scales. So major scales are often what we'll cover first in lessons, and then we'll go to minor scales. And for that, I'm going to switch to this. So for every major scale that sounds like this, we have a minor scale. We call them relative minors because they use the same notes, but we have a minor scale that sounds like this. So like if we wanted to, it might be a little dark, but if we wanted to do Joy to the World in minor, I want to use some different notes here. I'll explain why in just a little bit. Put a pin in that. So relative minors. So for every major, we have a minor that uses the same exact notes. And if you have a major key, now we can work out the whole steps and the half steps for this, but personally, I feel like tying each minor to its relative major makes it a lot easier to conceptualize. We'll talk through the half steps and whole steps, but first let's talk about how to find the relative minor of a major scale. So let's say you're working on C major, and you want to figure out its relative minor. There are two ways you can do this. First, you can go to the sixth note of the scale. So for C major, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, sixth note. Or the other thing we could do is go down 3 half steps. 1, 2, 3. That brings us to the same place. So that would be so again, C major had all white keys. So we're going to start on A, also using all white keys. So that's the A minor scale. Specifically, we would call this the A natural minor scale because there are actually 3 different types of major scales that we see used in music. And we'll talk about why these exist in just a moment. But the one you just heard, that's the natural minor scale, because as the name implies, we're not changing anything. So C major had all white keys, relative minor will also have all white keys. And then we have the harmonic minor scale. So to do that, we do the same thing we just did, but we take the 7th note and raise it a half step. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Raise the 7th note. Harmonic minor. And then the 3rd is called melodic minor. And to play that, you're going to raise 6 and 7 on the way up, and then lower them back down. So I'll briefly touch on why we have these different versions. It's sort of related more to harmony, which we're going to talk about in just a moment. But it all relates to the 7th note of the major scale. So in the major scale, we call the 7th note a leading tone, because it naturally wants to go there. Like if you heard somebody play and they just stopped, that would kind of gnaw at you, right? Until you hear this. We don't really have that so much with A natural minor. I mean, maybe a little bit, but because it's a whole step, not so much. So the harmonic minor is meant to compensate for that. So we have that raised 7th leading to that top note. But we have another problem here because we have this awkward interval here, which to us sounds cool, but as you can imagine in the 17 and 1800s, not so much. So the melodic minor scale evolved to basically kind of cover that up. So with melodic minor, we're raising the 6 notes to sort of cover up that sort of awkward interval, go to the raised 7, and that smoothly leads us up to the top. And then when we come down, since we're not leading anywhere anymore, we can lower those back down. So you can do the same exact thing as we talked about with the major scale, just set up a backing track. You can put an A minor chord in iReal Pro and just have fun improvising with that. But since this can be kind of a tricky topic, let's try it with another key, another example. Let's take G major. So that one has an F sharp in it. And Dr. Chaotic, yes, this is live. So I would encourage anybody to ask any questions. This is live. I'm just going to pause periodically over the course of the live stream to answer questions, just so I can deliver some content, and then I'll go through the questions. But thank you for asking. Not a pre-recorded video. So let's do another example. Let's say we have G major scale, which has F sharp in it. Now, if we want to find the relative of that, again, you can go to the 6th note. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So that brings us to E. Or the shortcut is you can go down 3 half steps. 1, 2, 3. So that brings us to E minor. And because G major had F sharp in it, that means E minor is also going to have F sharp in it. So if we play E natural minor where we don't change anything, it'll sound like this. Harmonic would raise the 7th, going up and down. And then melodic minor would raise 6 and 7, going up. And then lower them, coming down. An example of this I like is a piece called Ballade by Bergmüller. That's in C minor. I don't want this to go over everybody's head too quickly, but that's 3 flats, which means the melodic minor would raise these 2 notes. And the beginning just has that going to what's called the tonic. That's the first note of the scale over and over again. It goes like this while playing a C minor chord in the right hand. So that's using the melodic version of this for a melody in a minor key. If we didn't raise that, listen to how awkward that would sound. I mean, again, maybe not for us in the modern age, but in the 1700s, not so much. To us, it kind of sounds like something out of Game of Thrones or something like that. And then if we did the harmonic version, also, I don't want to say awkward because I think it sounds cool, but again, if you go back a couple hundred years, they didn't think it was quite so cool. But compared to this, our ear hears that as leading to the first note of the scale much better. If you have any questions about minor keys, I know that can get a little trickier to understand, so feel free to drop, again, any questions in the comments, and then we'll pause in just a moment to see what questions anybody has. But I wanted to just cover one more topic before we open it up to some Q&A before we start talking about harmony, and that's the circle of fifths. So the good news is there is an organizational system for all of this. It's called the circle of fifths. But it also tends to be one of those things where we might learn it in a theory class at some point, and then it's sort of not forgotten about, but it's not really clear how it works or why we care. So I'm going to do a brief overview of that because there are only 12 pitches, and at least in Western music, we have 12 minor keys, 12 major keys. There's 24 altogether, and they're organized in this system called the circle of fifths. A fifth you can think of, I don't want to get too detailed with it because I don't want anybody to get confused, but in this context, think of a fifth as the distance from the first note to the fifth note of the scale, major or minor. So if you take a major scale, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that's a fifth, also known as a perfect fifth. It also works in minor, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, perfect fifth. So the way this works, I'm going to annotate this, and hopefully it's coming up properly. And for now, don't worry about the insides too much. So for this particular circle of fifths, and you can find all kinds of different designs, these on the outside are our major keys. These on the inside are our relative minor keys. But remember, relative, these are paired together. That's just how it works. And then in terms of how the circle is organized, and this is where if I lose you anywhere, please drop it in the chat because this can get a little tricky to understand. But basically we have C major. We'll just talk about major keys for now. So don't worry about this inside bit for the moment. So we have C major, so that's 0 sharps, 0 flats. So 12 o'clock, C major, that's all white keys. And this organizational system is helpful because then you don't have to like do whole steps and half steps every single time you're figuring out these scales. So when we go a fifth up to the right, as we go this way, for every major scale or minor, we're going to add a sharp. And then each one builds off the last one. I'm going to go through this kind of quickly. So G major has 1 sharp, D major has 2, A major has 3, E major has 4, B major has 5, G flat major has, let's use this one for now. I'll explain why in a moment. F sharp major has 6, and C sharp major that has 7. And again, each one builds off the last. So if you learn these in order, kind of going around the circle of fifths, it actually makes it a lot easier to understand. And it makes it a lot easier to see how the different sort of scales and keys relate to each other. So for example, G major has 1 sharp, that's F sharp. Each key going this way is going to keep the sharps of the previous key, and then it's going to add another one. We're not going to go through the entire thing, but D major, that's 2 sharps, so that'll keep the F sharp, and it adds C sharp. A major keeps the F sharp and the C sharp, adds G sharp. So basically, if you start here, make sure you get these sharps. That's your scale. So that's A major right there. Just checking the chat. And then as we go on, eventually we end up at C sharp major, and that's where every single note is sharp. C sharp, D sharp, E sharp. So there is, white keys can't have sharps. F sharp, G sharp, A sharp, B sharp, C sharp. But now if we start from the top and go the other way, so if we start here and go this way, it's the same system, but now we're starting with a flat, and then we're adding a flat with each one. So we have F major, that's 1 flat. B flat major, that's 2 flats. E flat is 3 flats. A flat is 4 flats. Now we're going to talk about what this business is. There are actually 3 pairs of keys. So this is 6 keys total where they can go by the sharp name or the flat name. It doesn't apply to these other ones, but it's only these bottom 3. And that's how this circle of fifths actually works without falling off the rails somewhere. So D flat major. So we're going to keep these sharp keys in the back of our mind, but now we're going to talk about these. So D flat major, that's going to be 5 flats. G flat major, that's 6 flats. And C flat major, that's where every single note is flat. So the way this can work, where you go around the entire circle, is basically when you get to the bottom, you're going to switch from sharp to flat, and that's how you're able to go the whole way. So just to illustrate that, if we start with C, at the top. This might be a little tricky to point as we go, but I'm basically starting here. I'm going to go all the way around there if you want to follow the letters. So we start from C major, up a fifth is G, up another fifth is D, then we're up to A, E, B, G flat. Now at this point, I'm going to switch to the sharp, to the, oh, sorry, I said the wrong thing again. Let me start over. So we have C major, G major, D major, A major, E major, B major, F sharp, but at this point I'm going to switch over to G flat so that I can keep going. Then we have D flat, I keep going, A flat, E flat, B flat, F, C. Kind of cool how that works, right? So again, this gives us an organizational system in order to learn these things. And it's easy to look at this and treat it like an assignment, like, oh, I have to memorize all 24 of these major minor keys. It's not like that at all. What I would suggest you do is taking these sort of concepts that we've talked about, especially with improvising and trying to make music melodies as much as you can. We'll talk about harmonies again in just a moment, but treat these as pairs as much as you can. And if we just treat it as 12 pairs, if you spend 1 month on each pair of scales, you have the whole circle of fifths learned in 1 year. So I would start with C major, A minor, all white keys, practice improvising C major, practice improvising with A minor, along with the different versions of it. And then once you feel like you've really immersed yourself in that, then move on to the next one. Again, not just doing theory assignments and analyzing, I mean, noticing it, of course, in your music. And we do want our students to be able to read and write and understand this stuff, just like with language. But I think the more you can actively create with this, and your students can create with it, they'll make that connection even more. Just to round that out, I know we talked about not doing too much notation with this, but just to illustrate how it applies, because especially if this is a new concept for you, any of this stuff, this is where the concept of a key signature becomes so important, because if something is in a key, the composer's not going to want to have to write, like, let's say G major has F sharp in it. The composer's not going to want to have to put a sharp next to every single F. So what they'll do is use what's called a key signature. So basically, the very short version of that is, this is an F, so they'll put a sharp here. This is an F, so they'll put a sharp there. And what that means is every single F in the entire piece, unless otherwise notated with a natural or something like that, we're not going to worry about that at the moment. But anytime you have an F, it's going to automatically be sharp. And something that we notice with a lot of students is if they haven't really learned scales, if they've sort of abandoned it, then when they encounter a key signature, especially a trickier one, like let's say, 3 sharps, that's A major, they don't see any of this that we've talked about, with this being, this cool universe of music in the world of A major. They just see it as sort of 3 annoying sharps that we keep missing every lesson, and then the teacher tells us. And then we just carry on as best we can. So that's what a key signature is. It sort of ties all this together. But my hope for this portion is that it's helped to sort of make the connection between scales, melodies, and then what we see on the page, which in this case is a key signature that tells us that we're in this universe, that hopefully after this live stream, you have an opportunity to practice actually making music with it. So with that, I'd love to sort of open it up to a Q&A before we go on to talking about harmony, which is the next step, because we can't talk about harmony without first understanding scales. So I'm just going to go through, if you're curious, my computer's over here. So if you see me kind of like looking this way, it's because I'm making sure that things didn't break and things like that. Jimmy asked if I can make a video on ear training. Yep, we'll absolutely add that to our queue. Thank you for the question. Let's see, we had a question about, are you able to play by ear? Yes and no. Again, a lot of my ear stuff has come from improvising, not necessarily. I mean, I sort of had a good ear already. I think, honestly, the more you listen to music and the more you sing, especially sing music that you're working on, singing music that you're listening to for fun, that'll help your ear for sure. But am I one of those people that can just hear a melody and like play it flawlessly on the first time? Not so much. I have to do some noodling around and figuring it out. But thank you for the question. All right, any other questions? It's exciting to see 20 people here. Thank you so much again for your time. Hoping that you're getting some value out of this. Or I suppose when there aren't any major questions, it's a good sign that we've covered things thoroughly. All right, we'll give it a couple more moments. If anybody else wants to answer the duck question, that's cool too. At the beginning of the live stream, if you're just joining us, I asked sort of a brain wheel turning question. Would you rather fight a horse-sized duck or 100 duck-sized horses? Oh, thank you, William. William is one of our fantastic teachers at South Shore Piano School. I like the idea of sensing the world of the key and not just annoying sharps. Yes, absolutely. Let's see. Oh, great question. So, whoops, I clicked the wrong thing. Garji said, can you please explain the 6th and 7th part one more time? Yes, absolutely. This tends to be one of the trickiest concepts when we talk about major scales. I'm just going to flip back to this screen. And I think I have enough of the screen to explain this. And we'll touch on this a little bit more when we talk about harmony in major and minor keys. So we have 3 versions of minor, and I'll start with A minor just because that one's the easiest to talk about since it's all white keys. So A natural minor, we don't change anything. So C major, the relative, has all white keys. Relative A minor, also going to be all white keys. So natural minor, we don't change anything. However, most music that we listen to doesn't actually use the natural minor scale, and it's because of the 7th note. I'll show you a couple examples. So for that reason, we have 2 other versions of minor that you'll usually see in your music. We practice the scales just to sort of get them in our ear and have a deeper understanding of them, but you'll see these sort of sporadically in music. So like if you're playing a piece of music that's in A minor, you'll likely see some G sharps in there, and I'll explain why. So it's all about the 7th note of that scale. So in a major key, let's take C major, the 7th note, that's called the leading tone, it really wants to resolve to this note. We call this the tonic. Tonic is the first note of any scale. So in C major, C is the tonic. In G major, G is the tonic. In D major, D is the tonic. So the 7th note of a major scale wants to resolve to that top note. We'll often hear that note in a what's called a 5 chord. You'll probably hear this in a lot of the music that you listen to. Now, let's take that same little progression and let's put it in minor. If we leave that minor scale, if we don't change anything, that same progression sounds like this. Because we have a whole step here now, it doesn't really have that leading tone quality. Definitely not the same quality as this. Hopefully your ear can kind of hear the difference there. So that's why we have what's called the harmonic minor scale. That's the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 to get that leading tone that can resolve there in a minor key. Otherwise, when you hear music that uses the natural minor scale, we usually say that's in the Aeolian mode, the 6th mode. Don't feel like you have to remember that. It starts to sound very folksy, kind of like Lord of the Rings. And then in terms of the melodic minor scale, that's because if we left it at just the raised 7, then we have a problem when we want to make melodies with that scale, because we have this. That sounds kind of Middle Eastern. Nothing against that sound. We're very open in our current modern times, but as you can imagine, in the 16th, 17th, 18th, 19th century, that didn't go over so well. So the reason why we have the raised 6 and 7 is to smooth that over. So when we have a minor melody, we can lead to that tonic without any weird intervals while still having that leading tone. And then when we're going downwards, we don't have to worry about that raised stuff anymore. So then we lower it because we're not leading anywhere anymore. I'm not as great at improvising in minor, but I'll try to just make something up. So in A minor, leading tone, tonic, and then I'll try to use melodic next. Raise 6, 7, raise 7, 1. So it sounds much more natural to our ear than that's the harmonic version. And if we did natural minor, if anybody could remark in the chat if that was helpful at all, that would really help. That would be really helpful for the feedback. So that's the concept of raise 6 and 7. And then Ming Chen asked, how do you play a 7th chord? That was sort of beyond the scope of this video, or this live stream, but I can show you really quick. And we'll talk about it with harmony as well. So a 7th chord is basically when you take a major chord, and again, we're literally about to talk about this, and it's just when you stack one more note on top of it. That is a 7th chord. And we most often see 7th chords in classical music built on the 5 chord. It's called the dominant 7th chord. Again, we'll talk about that shortly. Oh, and thank you, William. I accidentally clicked that, but just to highlight, that was helpful to play all 3 minor versions back to back. Yes, I think that also really helps to just kind of hear how one relates to the other, because we just don't hear stuff in Aeolian and using those other tonalities. Okay. All right, wonderful. Thank you. I hope I'm pronouncing it right, Gargi or Jargi. Sorry. Thank you. So glad to be of help. Glad that made sense. And with that, again, you can ask some more questions. We'll have another Q&A at the end. But with that, we're going to delve into chords and harmonies. So now we've talked about how scales are built, how melodies are created with them, the little variations we have to make with minor. So now let's talk about harmony and how harmonies are created from scales. And we'll start again with a major key. Now that we've talked about how scales are put together, I'm going to move back to my close-up keyboard. So let's say we're in the key of C major. So my melodies are created using the C major scale. My harmonies are also created using the C major scale. So to do that, I build chords on each note of the scale. So let's actually pause for a moment to talk about what a chord is. A chord is just playing 3 or more notes at once. So this is a chord, this is a chord, this is a chord, this is a chord. 3 or more notes makes a chord. When we're talking about a triad, or when we're talking about, say, a C major chord, we're talking about 1, 3, and 5 of that scale. So let's say we're in C major, 1, 3, and 5, that's a C major chord. If we're in A major, 1, 3, 5. And when I say 1, 3, 5, I'm not talking about finger numbers, but the order of notes in the scale. So first note of the scale, third note of the scale, fifth note of the scale. So that's an A major chord. So going back to C major now, and this is where you can have a lot of fun at home, just kind of playing around with different harmonies. You can build a chord on that first note, so this would be a C major chord, and then you can keep going and build a chord off of each note of the scale. So we would say this is the 1 chord, the 2 chord. You're welcome, Michelle, in the chat. This is the 3 chord, 4 chord, 5 chord, the 6 chord, the 7 chord, and then back to the 1 chord. So whatever music you're playing, and this is very basic, it doesn't mean that we're limited to only those chords when we're improvising or composing or whatever, but this is sort of the basic lay of the land, that we have the 1 chord, the 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then back to 1. But you want to make sure that you're using the sharps or flats or whatever key you're in. So like, let's say we're in G major. The chords for that would be the 1 chord. So again, I'm in the universe of G major, the 2 chord. Now the 3 chord, there's an F there, right? So remember there's an F sharp in G major. So that means the 3 chord is going to be this, the 4 chord, the 5 chord, the 6 chord, the 7 chord, and then back to the 1 chord. And then just one side note, this is a very basic version of these things. It's not usually going to be a blocked chord like this, like a simple blocked chord, especially once you get to more advanced music. So when we talk about these harmonies, basically you can have these notes spread out all over. I'll show you what I mean. Let's say I have a 1, 4, 5, 1 progression. So again, I've built a chord on the first note, I've built a chord on the 4th note, built a chord on the 5th note, and then back to 1. I can play that same progression or see that same progression like this. 1 chord, 4 chord, 5 chord, and then back to 1. So just to explain that a bit, even though I was playing all over the piano, like when I said one chord, I did this. So we said the one chord was just C, E, and G, right? So I was just playing C's, E's, and G's all over the piano. As long as it's only C's, E's, and G's, that would be a C major chord, or in this case, a one chord. So you can see all kinds of different patterns. A four chord could just be a simple triad. It could be this. It could be this. It could be this. As long as there are F's, A's, and C's in there, and we can change the order of that, we call those inversions. But as long as you just have those notes, there's so many different arrangements you can have of any of these chords. But it all comes down to this basic concept of you can build a chord on every note of the scale. Now let's talk about, this is where things get a little confusing in terms of chord names and what it means to have different chords in a key. Because let's take C major as our example again. The second chord, does that sound like a major chord or a minor chord? Sounds kind of like a minor chord, right? So this is a D minor chord, but it's the 2 chord of C major. So this is where the concept of being in a key versus the chords in whatever key you're in are important and can also get a little confusing. So think of the key, the key you're in as like the house that you live in. So if we're in G major, we're living in the G major house right now. And then the 1 chord, that could be like one room of the house. And then the 2 chord, that's a minor chord. It's like another room of the house. 3 chord, also minor, could be another room of the house. 4 chord, 5, 6, 7, 1. But if we're in a different key, you know, it can have a similar room, a similar style of house. So like, let's say we're in the key of D minor, which has 1 flat. Now D minor is the 1 chord and F major is the 3 chord. So we have the key that you're in, and then we also have the chords within that key. If you have any questions about how that works, just drop that in the chat and we'll get that in the Q&A at the end. But each chord has sort of its own function, and we're not going to get too much into the theory of this. This is where there's a really funny Family Guy clip, and after this live stream I'll put it in the comments. I thought about sort of piping it into the live stream, but I was almost certain that the copyright police would come after me. I don't sing at all, but for the greater good, I'm going to try to recreate that here. Because in a key, like we'll take C major. We'll stay in C major for now. 1's major, 2's minor, 3 is minor, 4 is major, 5 is major, 6 is minor, 7 is diminished, different kind of chord, and then we're back to major. So in this scene, the baby character Stewie, he's like playing his guitar outside and just riffing on some chords. And this is what I would encourage you to do at home if this is a new concept for you, is to play around with these different chords. And I'm going to do I would encourage you to search up this video afterwards or look in the comments if you're watching the replay, because I'm not going to do it justice here. But he says, but he does something like, let's see. All right, I'm in my C chord. I'm in my house. Everything's nice and safe. Maybe it's time to go outside. I'll go to F major. That's my 4 chord. Oh, it looks nice out here. It's pretty sunny. Maybe I'll go up the hill and go to G major. That's a 5 chord. But then we go to D minor. Oh, it's a little dark now. This isn't quite what I thought it was going to be. And then I go a little further out, and then I'm back to A minor. Still in C major, just different chords. And then I go back to my house. So pieces of music will usually start with a 1 chord. They'll go different places, and then it'll come back to the 1 chord. Even though that's like a silly little cartoon example, there's actually a lot of musical truth there, because in a piece of music, we'll start with a 1, we'll go different places, and then we'll get back to 1. So how can we experiment with this? Or actually, before we even talk about experimenting, let's talk about this concept of harmony, but in a minor key now, because this is also going to relate to that harmonic melodic concept that we were talking about. So like we talked about in a basic key like C major, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, or say we're in G major, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It's the same concept with A minor, but we're going to have an adjustment for the 5 chord and for the 7 chord. So for an A minor, we have the 1 chord, 2 chord, 3 chord, the 4 chord. Now for the 5 chord, in 99% of music, the 5 chord, we're actually going to use the raised 7 from the harmonic minor scale. So if you remember this, we're going to use that here for the 5 chord. So the 5 chord, we're going to alter to turn that into a major chord, again, so that it can resolve properly going to a 1 chord. So the 5 chord will use that raised 7. 6 chord is just all white keys. Now the 7 chord will also use that raised 7 from harmonic minor, because the 7 chord also usually resolves to the tonic. That's the 1 chord. So how do we play around with this as we continue to deepen our knowledge of harmonies? Just like we were talking about with melodies, the best thing you can do is just create, improvise, even compose. So in an example, I feel like I keep using C major, so maybe we'll pick a different example. Maybe we'll do G major that has the F sharp in it. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1. And you can just play around with different chord combinations and see what you think. You could do a really popular one is 1, 6, 4, 5. My colleagues are probably going to kill me, but if you know more than one key, if you're working on, say, G major and F major, you could try taking that chord progression, 1, 6, 4, 5, try putting it in a different key. Again, just translating it to a different scale, like we've been talking about. So in F major, which has B flat in it, that'll be 1, 6, 4, 5. And you can even do the same thing with melody if you wanted to. Or you can play around with really, sort of oddball combinations. You can do like 1, 3, 6, 4, 5, 1. And when you're getting really good at that, or especially if you found a chord progression that you really like, you can try combining that chord progression with some melodies that you make up in your left hand. So for example, I'll noodle around in, let's try D major. And again, all I have to do is, as long as I play chords that are in this key and then improvise with the D major scale, for the most part, things should sound pretty good. But in just a moment, we'll talk about how melody and harmony relate when it comes to chord tones and non-harmonic tones. But just to show you an example, let's say I found a progression that I like. 1, 6, 3 is a little unusual, but why not? 3, 4, 1. Kind of an unusual progression, but again, the more you can experiment, the better. And I might do something like, or something like that. Or if that feels like too much, you can keep it simple. You could just do, even just half notes just to get started. No, wait, that's quarter note, sorry. So again, we're immersing ourselves in the key before we even look at it in the music. And then let's briefly talk about chord tones and non-chord tones, because that's an important thing to think about as you're improvising music, as you're composing music, as you're looking at the music that you're playing. So we'll go back to C major. Why not? So we have the 1 chord, the 2 chord, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and back to 1. So in our melody notes, we can have notes that are in the chord. So this is C major, that's my 1 chord, C, E, G. If I have a note that's in that chord, that's going to sound good because it's in the chord. And then we have melody notes that are called non-harmonic tones because they're not in the chord. Now you can use these, but check this out. All right, that doesn't sound terrific, and neither does this. And this is technically a major 7th chord, so that's okay. But something like this, that if you hear just that, or if you hear it held, it's going to sound kind of weird. But watch this. I'm going to play the same note, but I'm going to put it in a little bit more context. Sounds better, right? Than just that. So that's what we call non-harmonic tones. And we have different categories. We might have a neighbor note. That's where you have a chord tone, non-harmonic, then we come back to it. We have a passing tone. That's where you have a chord tone, non-harmonic tone that continues to a chord tone. And then you can also have chromatic non-harmonic tones. So that's if we just go outside the key altogether and do something like this. So I compare it to a little bit like a little bit like seasoning, where you want to use it just the right amount, but if you kind of overdo it, then it makes the dish a little less palatable, shall we say. So to sort of I'm going to open it up to or actually, sorry, now that I'm remembering, Michelle had a question about seventh chords. Since we just talked about harmony, let's talk about that really quickly. This is common in jazz. So let's say, once again, I know I'm using C major a lot. All we're changing for a seventh chord is it's the same system where we're stacking thirds, or if it wasn't clear about stacking thirds, it means we're just skipping a note to make these chords. But to make a seventh chord, we're just adding one more. So we call that a seventh chord because the interval from the bottom note to the top note is a seventh. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So this is very common. Actually, not even common. It basically is the language of jazz. So in jazz, we don't really have these just basic triads, but we have these seventh chords. And then if we're getting into extended harmonies, we stack them even more. So basically, if you have a tune that uses like basic chords and you want to kind of like jazzify it, you could just stack an extra third on top and turn into jazz chords. Like so that's the short version of how seventh chords work. But thank you for that question. So to sort of round out our discussion about this, because if you were here at the beginning, we were talking about how many of these concepts aren't taught like this. It usually happens with what's on the page, and by the time we get to a point where we're starting to see how it applies to the music, we're already kind of like burnt out because we didn't really understand the purpose in the first place. So the purpose of this is basically to flip that, which is what we've been working on for about the past hour now. But just to show you two examples of how this would apply in your music, let's take, I was looking up some suitable examples earlier. There's this minuet in E flat major. So if we know nothing about scales and we haven't tried any of this kind of stuff, these three key signatures or these three flats in the key signature just become sort of an inconvenience if we even remember they're there in the first place. But contrast that with if you've improvised in the key of E flat major, which is what this is, three flats. If you've played around with harmonies, then again, you know what it means to be immersed in that world of E flat major. So then when you play this, it's just a matter of sight reading it in that key using that scale. E flat major. Can you hear the relationship? And then another example just from the world of pop music is a great example, Let It Be, because this applies to chord charts. If anything, it applies even more to chord charts and actually makes popular music really easy to play because a lot of pop music only uses like 4 chords for most of the tune, or maybe 5 or 6. So Let It Be, whoops, it does not seem to be reflecting on my screen properly. Let's see if I can get this to mirror. All right, one moment. Okay, so here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna improvise, and we're gonna go here, and okay, that's frozen. I'm not sure if you're gonna be able to see this, but see how we have these chord symbols here. So we're in the key of 1 flat, so we know that's F major. Actually, give me 1 second, make sure I'm displaying properly. All right, thanks everybody for bearing. So we have 1 flat in our key signature. So that means we're in the key of F major. Again, if we look at these chords, capital F, that means F major, that's the 1 chord. C major, that's the 5 chord. D minor, that's the 6 chord. Back to C, back to B flat. All these chords are in F major. So if I'm playing Let It Be, and I know my F major scale, and I've played around with my chords in F major, that makes this, really easy to play. One chord, 5, 6, 5, 4, 1, 5, 1, and then we have a little passing tone, 1, 2, 7, 1. It's all chords that are in F major. How cool is that? So with that, I hope that we're going to do our little game show in just a moment. So stick around because you can play from home. And I'm just dying to see if this works the way I think it will. But before we do that, I just wanted to open it up to any questions, any other demonstrations that I can give on harmony and how it's constructed from scales and how all this stuff works. My ultimate hope is that you'll be able to take some of this experimentation stuff we've been talking about, and as you create and as you explore, you can start seeing it, how it actually applies to any music that you're working on. But we'll give it just a minute or two to see who might have any questions. Or if anybody wants to answer the duck question, again, that makes a fun revisit question. So the question at the beginning of our live stream was, would you rather fight a horse-sized duck or 100 duck-sized horses? Okay, well, I'll take no questions as a sign that we're doing pretty good then. If you think of any other questions after the live stream, oh, here we go. Can you please give one more small example on the harmonic notes? Absolutely. Again, this tends to be one of those topics. It's a little tricky, but once you get it, once you practice with it, and once you see it in your music, it'll start making a lot of sense. Actually, let me see if my iPad's working again. Nope, it's still frozen. Okay, so I'm just going to have to make up an example. I was going to try to bring up an example of a minor piece. You know what? Let's see. All right, I've got an example for you. A lot of people are, so let's take the key of A minor again. Again, it's really easy to talk about just because it's all white keys. I think a lot of people are familiar with this. Kind of embarrassing. I couldn't remember a couple of those notes, but anyway, so this actually is using the harmonic minor scale. Not at the beginning though. This is that. So at the beginning, this is a 1 chord. A's, C's, and E's. So that's my 1 chord in A minor. At the beginning, this would be one of those non-harmonic neighbor tones we were talking about. So chord tone, chromatic neighbor, 1 chord. This is the 5 chord. See how that's an F sharp? That comes from harmonic minor. So that's the, because this has resolved to the 1 chord. Now let's hear that same example if I use the natural minor scale. So that's if we had just all white keys. So that would sound like this. Do you hear how that just doesn't sound right to our ear? So again, that's when we're going from a 5 chord in minor to resolve to the 1 chord, in this case, A minor. Okay, hopefully that example kind of solidifies the concept, but if not, do feel free to come back in the comments, and I'll make there is a video. We do have a video of this concept on our YouTube channel. It's called The Ultimate Guide to Natural, Harmonic, and Melodic Minor. If you want to search our channel and check it out. And if you haven't subscribed already, we would so love it if you would take the moment to just hit the button, because we'd so love to see you again. Did we have any other questions? We'll give it a couple seconds and then we'll start our game show and hope that it all works properly and not like the iPad freezing. Or actually, not the iPad freezing, more like my screen sharing software. Okay, well, with that, I'm going to change over to this page, and you want to get a second device ready or open a second window for this. And just a heads up, we do have a little bit of a time delay on this, about 5 to 6 seconds. So you'll just want to pay attention on your other device. So your second device, that's going to be your gameplay device. Game we're about to play. not sure if you're getting any sound. That's not necessarily super important for this. So you're going to want to go to kahoot.it, and once you get to that page, you're going to type in the game pin. So that's 897989. So again, get a second device. You can do it on a phone, you can do it on an iPad. You can just open another window in your browser. This is the first time we've tried this. So even if you hate games, if you could just do it so we know that it works, that would be incredibly helpful for us. All right, we got a couple people coming in. We got Crispy Bacon, the banana. Awesome. Any other takers? We'll give it like a minute in case there's some unforeseen lag. Stella, thank you for joining. Is any sound coming through? Can somebody put that in the chat if you're actually hearing sound as we continue to optimize this funness that we're having? Hang with the bro. Okay, we got 4. And this won't be very long, by the way. I only put like 6 or 7 questions just in case the whole thing didn't work. Didn't want to waste the time. But so far, it seems to be working fine. This is exciting. All right, we'll give it 20 more seconds. Oh, thank you, Angela. I'll keep working to optimize this this process for the next one. We'll give it 10 more seconds. See, every time I say 10 more seconds, another person joins, and I feel bad. Start. So maybe let's give it like 10 seconds. Okay, so we're about to get started. So again, there's a little bit of a delay with this YouTube live thing. So you're getting me about 6 seconds later than whatever I'm saying or doing. So I would keep an eye on your device, not just the YouTube live stream, because you're going to get the questions before you actually hear me say them on the live stream. I'm going to go ahead and wait like 7 seconds to make sure everybody gets that before we actually start. So again, have your device ready, be watching it, because you'll basically get the first question without notice. So the way this works, once we start, we'll have multiple questions up on the board based on our live stream. And then if you get the answer wrong, you get no points. If you get the question right, you get points. The faster you answer, the more points you get. Okay, so of our 15 remaining viewers, looks like we have 7 playing with us. We'll go ahead and get started. All right, here we go. All right, first question. It's our YouTube live scale and harmony Kahoot. We're going to start with a softball quiz. What is the name of this YouTube channel? Is it South Shore Music School, South Shore Piano School, Mr. Beast, or Keys R Us? All right. All right. One person thought it was South Shore Music School. That's okay. We'll forgive you. And let's see how our leaders stack up. So as you can see, things change depending on how fast we get. Hang in with the bro or hang with the bro in number 1. And let's continue with question 2 as we continue getting the hang of this. Second question. What is the order of whole steps and half steps for a major scale? Is it whole, half, half, whole, half, whole, half, whole, half, whole, half, whole, half, 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 or A, B, C, D, E, F? All right, nice. A majority. Yes, the correct answer is whole, half, whole, half. And one person said A, B, C, D, E, F, G. I'll assume maybe that person missed that part of the live stream, or maybe it was just being funny. And with that, let's see how that changes our boards. Oh, things changed quite a bit. So we got the banana leading in number 1. Congratulations on your skyrocketing up the leaderboard. And we'll continue now with the next question. Which notes from a scale do you use to form a tonic chord? So that's the one chord. Is it 156, 123, 135, or 911? I'm guessing it's like one person who's internet connection. Great. All right, nicely done. 135. That is your tonic chord. So, like if you're in C major, all white keys, C, E, G, that is your tonic chord. So let's see how that changes our lineup. All right, Da Banana on fire, as Kahoot tells us at the top. Got some switches around the bottom. And let's continue with our next question. Fill in the blank. For every major scale, there is a relative, cousin, minor, martyr, or mackerel. Seconds left. All right, well done. The answer is minor and not mackerel. So let's let's see how that changes our leaderboards. All right, Magash coming up from behind, along with Crispy Bacon. Da Banana still leading strong, followed closely behind by Stella. Let's continue on to the next question. 5 of 7. What does it mean to be in a key? Does it mean you're playing only on black keys, scale, playing as fast as possible, or using chords? The correct answer is using notes grouped as a scale. You do have chords that come from being in a key, but the basic definition of being in a key is using those notes, whether for chords, melody, and everything in between. Let's see how that may or may not change our leaderboards. All right. 2 more questions to go, though. It's still anybody's game. Next question. What are non-harmonic tones? Signs your car needs a repair, the lowest notes on the piano, notes that don't fit in a chord harmony, or notes that you can't improvise with. Hey, everybody got this right. All right, awesome. Notes that don't fit in a chord's harmony is the correct answer. So much will depend on how fast people answered the question. All right, the leaderboard remains the same. All right, last question. How do you get better at scales, harmony, and piano? I'll leave this one to you. I think I've messed with people's heads on this one a little bit. I apologize. This seemed like a funny idea at this time. All right, so every single choice was correct. So as long as you were fast to the trigger, you and pressed anything, you got this one correct. You must practice. You must spend time with it, not only with theory and working your fingers and stuff, but actually creating and exploring and all that wonderful stuff. So let's see what our final lineup was. In third place, we had Nagash, whoever that is. Thank you so much for joining us. Number two, we had Psycho. And then at number one, we had Banana. Congratulations. And thank you for playing. One is up, Stella and Dark. Oh, sorry, I had a like Darky. That's a really cool name, by the way. All right. And with that, that concludes our live stream. Let's switch it back over to this camera now. And before we sign off, I just wanted to thank everybody And I just want to open up one last time to any questions anybody has about anything, any comments, anything we can improve on in a future live stream. If you're watching the replay of this, thanks for watching. I'd love to have you subscribe. Hit the subscribe button, drop some comments, let us know how you felt. Can we do another one, please? Okay, yes, I think that is go for the fun thing. We might make that a regular part of our YouTube live. I'll actually figure out how to get this out to you as well. Hang with the bro got 6th place. LOL. Glad we can approach it with some live lightheartedness. Oh, thank you, Jeffrey. Jeffrey had a really nice comment. Thank you. Great live stream. Thank you so much. That always is a nice confidence booster. Hope you'll join us again. All right. Well, since so many people are still here and there are no questions, how about I play some music for you if you would like to stick around before we sign off as a celebration of what we can make with chords and melodies. So this is Let It Be in the key of F major. And actually, you know what? Let's try this view. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1. Because we're not playing and sharing music. And a fun thing you can do too, if you know your scales really well, you can take an existing song and make up a new melody. So I know my F major scale. I'm gonna use the same chords and just try to make a new tune. All right, thank you all so much again for joining. Hope to see you at the next one. And again, thank you so much, South Shore Piano School, Jonathan Roberts. On behalf of my 9 amazing colleagues and I, thank you for sticking around and watching. I would love any feedback on the video in the comments, anything that you'd like to see in the future. We are here to serve you. Have a fantastic week ahead and happy practicing, happy creating.